Lovely. So we're just going to start recording now. As I said, there will be a copy of this presentation available afterwards. There will also be a post-meeting feedback survey for you. So please fill those in. We always welcome feedback. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Pete Tyson. Welcome, Pete. He's a Senior Development Consultant from the Water Hygiene Centre, and he has 20 years experience at various levels in the water hygiene industry, so very experienced, including involvement in the 2002 outbreak in Barrow in Cumbria, also managing nuclear power station contracts, training of responsible persons in water hygiene. And Pete also recently co-authored an article published by the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, which discussed COVID-19 return to work and the actions that businesses should be taking to prepare themselves before reopening. So thanks very much for joining us this morning, Pete. I'm going to hand over to you. If you could share your screen, that would be wonderful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the introduction there, Adele, but I'd rather you didn't say very experienced. It does make me feel extremely old. So just bear with me 1 second. Now that should be sharing now with a water safety briefing and a chain of infection reservoir of organisms. Perfect. And is it scrolling? No, it's not. It is now. Is that right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, Adele, and thank you for having me. Again, 45 minutes or 40 minutes to 45 minutes on a broad range subject is tough to whiz through. So there's a lot of information on the slides. If anybody has got any specific questions, then please feel free to ask them, and I'll try my best to answer them as best I can. So I suppose, again, I always start this with, I do prefer to have face-to-face meetings. I do prefer to try and provide a bit of training to people where I'm present and I can see some of the reactions. It's very difficult to sometimes present to blank screens, but I appreciate that the new methodology of presenting is changed, and I'm just pleased that I'm more often than not remembering now to unmute myself. So instead of just talking, I do the unmute button first and then talk, and that has changed relatively recently. So I suppose best thing to do is get going with it, really. And as you can tell from this sort of photograph at the start there, the reservoir of organisms, and that's just a common issue that we see across a number of areas there, with some mop heads in a sink touching a outlet. And I suppose from a Legionella perspective, it's not really that much of a problem, but we're all familiar with TBCs, Legionella, Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And there are other waterborne pathogens which are becoming more and more interesting, such as Cuprividis, for example, which has been identified in recent years. So what I'll do is, the title being Chain of Infection, and it's worthy of note that the World Health Organization details that almost 2 billion people depend on healthcare facilities with no water. And worldwide, there's 1 in 4 healthcare facilities that has got no water. So 1 in 3 does not have access to hand hygiene where care is provided. 1 in 10 has no sanitation services, and 1 in 3 does not segregate waste safely. And in the world's 47 least developed countries, the LDCs, there's 1 in 2 healthcare facilities. They don't have basic drinking water. 1 in 4 healthcare facilities has no hand hygiene facilities at points of care, and 3 in 5 lack basic sanitation services. So with this in mind, what is an infection? Okay, so a nosocomial infection is also called hospital-acquired infection and can be defined as an infection acquired in hospital by a patient who has been admitted for a reason other than that infection. So an infection occurring in a patient in a hospital or healthcare facility in whom the infection was not present or incubated at the time of admission. So this includes infections acquired in the hospital but appearing after discharge, and also occupational infections among staff of the facility. Okay, so chain of infection, and for clarity, for a little bit of clarity on terms there of healthcare associated infection or hospital acquired infection, these are pretty much interchangeable terms for nosocomial infections. I suppose in the World Health Organization in 2016 issued guidelines on core components of infection prevention and control programs at the national and acute healthcare facility level. So in this report, it states that healthcare associated infections, HAIs, are one of the most common adverse events in care delivery and are an endemic burden, coupled with epidemics, i.e. the coronavirus, and major public health problems. So sticking with HAIs, hospital acquired infections, how much of a problem are they? In May 2011, the World Health Organization issued reports on the burden of endemic healthcare associated infection worldwide, summarized in a fact sheet, and these being, of every 100 hospitalized patients at any given time, 7 in developed and 10 in developing countries will acquire at least one healthcare associated infection. At any given time, the prevalence of HAIs in developed countries varies between 3.5 and 12%. And the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control estimates that 4.1 million patients are affected by approximately 4.5 million episodes of hospital-acquired infections every year, and approximately 30% of patients in ICUs are affected by at least one episode of hospital-acquired infection. So the longer patients stay in an ICU, the more at risk they become of acquiring an infection. And high frequency of infection is associated with the use of invasive devices, in particular central lines, urinary catheters, and ventilators, for example. So for an infection to occur, there needs to be 3 things that we've identified, and these are the presence of a microorganism. This is the immunocompromised patient, and then a transmission. So how would it get from person to person? How was it transmitted to that person? And over the next few slides, we'll take a look at each of these contributing factors. We're going to start with immunocompromised patients. So it's fair to say that we do know a little about types of patients and their susceptibility. So I'm sure we've all got some experience with Legionella, and it's been around, well, I'm hoping we have, because it's been around for, since 1976. It was identified in 1977 as the Legionella bacterium, but it was actually a first case in 1976. But there were obviously previous cases prior to this. And documentation has been around since, for a long, long time as well. I think it was when 1985, the Stafford outbreak, where Sir Badenoch created a document, which was a forerunner for HSG 274. It's, documentation like that has been around for some time. So let's think about Legionella specifically, and who do we know are susceptible? So newborn babies, neonates, people with increasing age, greater than 50 years. Men apparently are 3 times more likely than women to contract the disease. Those with existing respiratory disease that makes the lungs more vulnerable to infection. Those with illnesses and underlying health conditions, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, or alcoholism. Smoking, we know that gives an impaired lung function, so heavy cigarette smoking. Patients who are immunocompromised as a result of illness or treatment. Those that are on immunosuppressant drugs that inhibit the body's natural defenses against infection. So there is data from the Public Health England showing the relationship between people who caught Legionella disease and those with people who caught it that had underlying conditions. So looking at any underlying condition, so 2/3 of people who caught Legionella disease had something fundamentally wrong with them. 33% were smokers. 29% had heart conditions, and 15% had diabetes. And in 2012, where the outbreak in Edinburgh of Legionella disease, 56 confirmed cases and 36 probable and possible cases linked to this outbreak. And there were 4 deaths, unfortunately, which were reported amongst the confirmed cases. And a report on the outbreak detailed underlying conditions among the confirmed cases, where 70% had a serious underlying medical condition, 25% had a condition or were on treatment that was likely to result in immunosuppression, and 16% were diabetic, 79% were reported to be current smokers, compared with 19% in the overall Lothian population. And 9% were reported to have excess alcohol consumption, based on the clinical assessment of alcohol consumption greater than 21 units per week for males and 14 units for females. Okay, so on any underlying condition there, as you can see, over the last 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, over the last 4 years, it's in and around the 73 to 75 percentile mark. Okay, so let's now consider another waterborne pathogen, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and HTMO4 details those in augmented care are the most susceptible for contamination with Pseudomonas aeruginosa. There's no fixed definition of augmented care at the moment, and it's most care that is designated as augmented will be that where medical nursing procedures render the patient susceptible to invasive disease from environmental and opportunistic pathogens such as Pseudomonas aeruginosa and other organisms. And broadly, they include sort of critical care, adult pediatrics and neonates, renal, respiratory, including cystic fibrosis, and ICU and ITU. And also, Public Health England issue an annual data report on Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacteria. And the last updated report issued in December 2020 had data extracted from Public Health England's data capture system on the 23rd of June 2020. Data that's reported for 146 acute trusts on 191 clinical commissioning groups. And the annual counts and rates being 2017 to 2018, 4,305, 2018 to 2019, 4,186, 2019 to 2020, 4,336, or 4,336. I've just considered two types of waterborne pathogens, that's being Legionella and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. As we can already determine, those susceptible to these pathogens and how they can be infected. And as noted at the beginning, the 30% of ICU patients will pick up a hospital-acquired infection. So the chain of infection. So let's start thinking about the transmission of pathogens. Where does it get? How does it move? How does it get around? So pathogens need to be transmitted, and the 2011 World Health Organization report identified the following transmission pathways. And these were three identified areas: ingestion, drinking, inhalation and aspiration, and contact. So over the next few slides, we're going to go into a little bit more detail behind this. And HTMO401 Part C for Pseudomonas aeruginosa provides a steer on transmission and contact. And first being direct contact. Direct contact is ingestion, bathing, contact with mucous membranes or surgical site, for example, and splashing from water outlets or basins when outlet is run. And the splashing element is a real hot topic, with many studies being carried out by various organisations and agencies, such as Public Health England, for example. And these studies are continuing as we speak. But with splashing, I suppose it's really key to make sure that you've got the design of the outlets correct, and the other basins, because all these have an impact and a factor associated with it, and a risk factor. So what is in the drain or end of the tap can be propelled through the air and land outside the basin area and onto a person, be it staff, visitor or patient. And there we have the contact. So this is demonstrated with the image on the right-hand side there, where the water has been injected with a fluorescent dye, okay, and obviously the outlet's been run, and you can see that the splash from the basin, from the outlet being run into the basin, has occurred, and it's over the sides of the basin. But also, if you take a little look down here, we're getting locations of fluorescence using a UV light, which is indicating that the splash can travel. And under studies that it's been identified to be able to travel up to 2 meters from the basin. So the second sort of way of transmission is indirect contact. And this can be inhalation of aerosols within the room, for example, or inhalation of aerosols from respiratory equipment, devices that produce an aerosol, or open suction of wound irrigation. Can be from medical devices, equipment rinsed with contaminated water, for example. It can be hands following washing in contaminated water from surfaces or from contaminated equipment, or reusable wash bowls. It can be also retrograde contamination, patient to outlet, then to next patient in room, for example. Or it can also be associated with cleanliness of tools and equipment of those who install, fit, maintain any water fitting within the facility, and also the components. So we're looking at, various people. Do they have a sterile area where equipment is cleaned, it's made sure to be sterile before any work has been performed on any basin or any outlet? So we're going to have to start thinking about this in a little bit more detail. I suppose the final element today is the presence of the microorganism in hospital environment. Okay, so how does it get there? And as we mentioned before, we saw this slide just a moment ago from the World Health Organization in 2011, and we can now see the rest of the detail being those of pathogens present. So bacteria such as E. coli, Legionella, and Mycobacterium. And since 2011, we've added a few more. We've added Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Cuprivardis. And Cuprivardis has probably raised its ugly head since in recent years with Glasgow. And PSA has been an issue since 2012 in Belfast. And a little background in the Cuprivardis one in Glasgow, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which opened in June 2015. Very early on, there were concerns about infections emerging in the patients. An inquiry was commissioned and the report was published in June 2020. The report runs to 227 pages with 63 recommendations. Some of the findings, and these were governance of the project during the design, during the build, during the commissioning and maintenance, did not adequately take account of the scale and complexity and specialist nature of the building project. And the QEUH project would have benefited from greater external expertise and greater uptake of internally available expertise to support decision-making processes on the water and air ventilation systems at key points in the design, build and commissioning phases. Some of the difficulties encountered with water and ventilation systems were the result of ambiguity concerning the status and interpretation of guidance. If we just go back a stage there, one of the things that the Water Hygiene Centre is trying to do is trying to educate the initial design phase. So we're trying to look at design reviews at the early stages before it gets to the builders, to the M&Es, to the installers, so that we can actually review the project at the front end to make sure it's ticking a lot of the boxes and is conforming to current guidance and guidelines. Because what we've found is that some historical projects have been commissioned prior to new release of documentation, new guidance, new advice, and they've not retrospectively been reviewed and kept up to speed, or reviewed and improved to make sure it's conforming to current guidelines. And I think one of the things that the Water Hygiene Centre have identified is that if you get to that front end a little bit quicker, and if you can educate that front end, then you've got a better potential for management or reducing the risks going forward, if that makes sense. So so organisms. Let's take a look at that from a IOSH perspective. So controlled substances hazardous to health. Do we eliminate or can we control? Well, I don't think we're ever going to eliminate naturally occurring organisms in the environment. And as we know from a Legionella perspective, it's a ubiquitous organism. It's formed, or it's found in lakes, rivers, streams, reservoirs, man-made reservoirs. It's found in a lot of watercourses. But like I say, it's ubiquitous. It's a naturally occurring organism. So we're never going to be able to eradicate it from eliminate it totally. So what have we got to do? We've got to control it. So control of substances hazardous to health. It looks to first eliminate those substances that are hazardous to health. We can't do that. So we're not going to remove our flora or our fauna. We're not going to remove water from our system installations because A, we need it. And none of that is achievable. So what is achievable? Obviously, we're just going to control it. And as such, to comply with IOSH, there is a need to control these substances that are hazardous to health. So let's think about where these microorganisms may be present. And as I mentioned, they're found in reservoirs, streams. But they're also, if it's from these locations, they're also going to be found in these locations. They're also going to be found in these locations. So we're going to get debris. We're going to get areas of potential contamination. And mains cold water is not sent to us as sterile water. It's sent to us as wholesome drinking supply water. It doesn't have to be sterile. And mains cold water distribution networks are not free from dead ends. They're not free from biofilms, and they're not free from cracks. So it's a very potential source for microorganisms to be present. So once we get it into our properties, we've got mains cold water entering our property. We've got once inside our property, it's our responsibility to manage the water and the systems to prevent the proliferation of microorganisms. So it's also one of the reasons why there's the Health and Safety at Work Act, there's control of substances, hazards to health, there's management of health and safety at work regulations. And those are the things that organisations get charged upon. You don't get charged on or taken to task on not conforming to the approved code of practice or HSG 274. They'll be charged with breaking the law in respect to Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. And the reason being is because once it's within our property, it's our responsibility, and therefore we've got to make sure that it's controlled. So the law is already there. The statute documentation is already there. But the approved code of practice, the L8 and HSG 274, the guidance, and HTML 401s, and all the rest of the guidance that's available, British Standard, etc., they're there to guide us into how to control it and what to do for the best management of it. So what might we have within our buildings? So we've got cold water storage tanks. Okay, we've got hot water distribution or hot water generators, and we've more than likely got some distribution systems. Yeah, going to the outlets, going to showers, going to various other locations. And a few examples of what issues may exist with these systems. So these are areas and issues that we've seen on a regular basis and come across. We've got birds in cold water storage tanks. We've got cold water storage tanks that are located in ceiling areas that are glass, that are potentially in extremely hot temperatures. And we've also got tanks that have got very limited access. So I wouldn't like to go and clean and disinfect that cold water storage tank, for example, without a fully functional risk assessment, man-safe system and scaffolding and et cetera, et cetera. We've also got, dead legs, dead ends. So these are dead legs because there is a potential for being able to flush. If there was no potential for that to be able to be flushed, it would be called a blind end. And that change in sort of wording has only recently occurred. So it's just something that we need to be aware of going forward. And also, how many people have seen facilities like this where there are a number of outlets within a room that that room's now being used as a bit of a storage room. So it's likely to say that the likelihood is that those outlets are not being used on a regular basis. But some of the issues that we've had with cold water storage tanks, for example, they can be oversized, or they can have poor turnover, poorly configured, and they could be gaining heat. Some of the issues with hot water generators, they could be undersized or not achieving temperature. They could be not set at the right temperatures or poorly configured. And then obviously we've got the distribution system, which could be cut off. It could have cut off ends, little used outlets, poorly configured, gaining heat due to lack of insulation, for example. And these are all issues that are on a day-to-day basis, or we come across on a day-to-day basis. And this photograph on the left here. Okay, so we've got a Belfast sink now on the right, and we've got a basin, a wash hand basin on the left here, and that looks to me as though it's a thermostatic mixing tap. But if you have a little look down here, that's already got a thermostatic mixing valve on it. So that doesn't really add up, does it? We've got a thermostatic mixing valve feeding a thermostatic mixing tap. So that sort of length of pipe from the thermostatic mixing valve shouldn't really be there. That should be fed with hot and cold water to the relevant points, and the actual mixer tap should be being used as an actual mixer tap. Okay, we've got potential biofilm formation in the basin, in the drain point. So we need to have adequate drainage from the basin to ensure that there is little area or little potential for stagnation. And biofilm development. We've got filters, some deposits here. Could be flux, could be non-RAS approved products. We've got a strainer, sorry, that's what I was looking for. We've got a strainer removed there with some deposits that have been caught up in the middle of it. And yeah, we've got sort of flexible hoses, which are fundamentally not to be used in NHS establishments. I think it was Dr. Tom Makin who did some analysis on the rubber hose within a braided flexible hose, and it was found to be contaminated with or potential for Legionella contamination. So he had all of the flexible hoses removed from all of the facility, and it is a recommendation, good practice, that they should be removed. Okay, so let's go to the outlet. We've got some flow straighteners or some roses. We've got a really horrible looking shower there with contamination. I do wonder how long that has been left where it's not been cleaned, removed and disinfected. So over the last few slides I've shared examples of reservoirs for microorganisms to grow, and there are many, many more for sure, and this was not an exhaustive list by any stretch. So now let's think of the final one, the human factor, from a human factor perspective, and that being, how has the reservoir of organisms come to be? So these human factors cover all those persons who may have an impact on the water system, for example. And these can be designers, builders, maintainers, cleaners, HC staff and patients. So this is, poor specification design from a designers and builders and installation guys, really. I suppose it's guys and girls. It's a poor specification design. It's resulted in high inherent risk, poor control of contractors and materials. And the reason why I say poor control of contractors is that is a basin and that is urine. So this was found by Daniel Pitcher, who was the MD of the Water Hygiene Centre. And yeah, it was deemed to be poor control of contractors, poor control of installation, no awareness of impact on components, for example. And this could be, like I said, clinical wash basins used as urinals during construction, components not kept sealed and covered, domestic hot water returns not installed to the specification detailed. A recent example there is a new build with 150 outlets, and none of them were installed to the specified 300 millimeters. What other sort of areas there can we take a look at in respect to maintenance and cleaners? So this could be incorrect components being used. As I mentioned before, the photograph where the poor storage of materials and incorrect processes. This could be sort of things like strainers not being cleaned or a buildup of biofilm and bacteria. This could be dirty tools and components being used, contamination from other sources, for example. Wash basins used to store dirty mop heads in contact with tap end, direct cross-contamination, and what is on the floor there is now on the end of the tap. Cleaners taking the cleaning cloth from the waste aperture up to the end of the tap, direct cross-contamination. So what has been at the plug as waste is now at the end of the tap. So all these things have got to be taken into consideration, and they've got to be reviewed and assessed. Final one, it's HC staff and patients. Incorrect use of the outlet. Use it as a storage receptacle, and no use of the outlet. Another one could be pouring the wrong fluid down a wash basin. Drinks could go down there. Patient wash water, urine, for example, not using the outlets. Patients using the wash basins, urinals. I think I'm probably using the word urinal a little bit too many times, so I'll stop. So over the last few slides, I've shared examples of human factors that impact on the reservoir of organisms. There are many more again, and this was not an exhaustive list. So this concludes really, I suppose, the presentation in respect to time to bring home, and obviously it's a time to bring home some of the takeaway points. And immunocompromised patients, this is hospitals contain patients who are susceptible to infection, for example. We've got transmission of pathogens between staff and patients and among patients. This is where patients are exposed to microorganisms through the three opportunities of transmission: inhalation, aspiration, contact, and ingestion. I'll go one further, direct contact and indirect contact. And finally, we've got the presence of a microorganism in hospital environments. This is where microorganisms are naturally occurring. We're not going to eliminate them. So a combination of favourable conditions exist for their proliferation, which is something that we potentially cause by design and building incorrectly designed systems. Obviously, then we've got controlling these favourable conditions will reduce infection. So again, we'll go back to the stage of we've got to manage and control it as far back as we possibly can at the design stage. And I've referenced a few documents throughout the presentation, and I just the list is here, and I think you get a copy of the pack, so they'll be easy to review and download if you feel like it. And I would like to say many thanks for spending the time for listening to me. We also do a weekly blog posted on our website and LinkedIn, and you can either follow me or the Water Hygiene Centre on LinkedIn too. And we've also got a YouTube channel, which we're then going to be putting onto our website, that we're uploading various ways of sampling, for example, or temperature monitoring, or sampling for Legionella, sampling for Pseudomonas, clarifier inspections, and also flushing of little used outlets. So feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks so much for that, Pete. That was really helpful. If it's slightly scary with some of your photos that you've got on there. I can't see any questions in the chat, but I've got a couple myself. So if I ask those first, if anyone else has any questions, they can put them in while I'm talking. So you mentioned during your talk about RAS fittings. Can you just explain what they are, please?
Yeah, these are RAS approved products. And just bear with me 1 second. I have got quite a good explanation. Right. A contractor had said to me, RAS is a subscription membership. Okay. It's not quite that. RAS approved products are listed in the RAS approved directory. And RAS also have the RAS approved plumber scheme, which is a membership scheme. It's not related to the RAS approved products. So RAS approved products are products that have gone through a process to be approved. Where do you go? To be approved and to be used within facilities. So one is a RAS approved plumber scheme and one is a RAS approved products. But the RAS approved products is just a directory and a list of products that can be used on in construction. And ideally, the products that we use should be RAS approved, and any non-RAS approved products shouldn't be used. And the list, I'm going through a bit of a debate now with somebody about a particular product who want to use it instead of EPDM gaskets, and I can't approve it from an AE perspective because it's non-RAS approved.
That's so if you're a building manager, like many people will be, you know, in health and safety, or most of us have got buildings, so that should be a standard of which we're looking for. Correct. when we're getting a contractor to do some work on our water system. We state to them that we want RAS approved products used on our water system. Yep, perfect. Brilliant, thank you. And then the only other question that I had, I can see there's one come up in the chat, but the only other one that I had was, I mentioned at the beginning when I was introducing you that you've done some guidance with the CIEH about for businesses reopening, and I just wondered if you had any top tips. You know, people are starting to reopen their businesses, get people back into the office and those kind of things, and obviously buildings that have been low usage or entirely mothballed for a period of time, Legionella is a concern. So are there any sort of top tips for people in that position, please?
It's a fabulous question. It was back in oh God, when was it? Was it 2019 was it 2020 or 2019 when we did the lockdown? I've lost you were talking about
of 2020. Yeah.
I'm losing years quickly.
It all merges into one, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, the advice the advice varies on your design and your system. Cold water storage tanks, for example, I'll be looking at doing an inspection and maybe sampling procedure, and maybe just going for a clean disinfection procedure and down services. From a mains fed system, I'll be looking at doing maybe some flushing, maybe some monitoring if need be. But one of the things that a lot of companies and organisations tried to do or did was just shut up the shop, just closed. And what they should have done was try to maintain flow and try to maintain usage as best possible, in respect to continuing to use it as it was meant to be designed for. So one of the issues that we're coming across now, Adele, is that the hybrid working sort of environment where 50% of staff want to work from home, 50% want to go back into the office. But we've got a facility there that was designed for 100% of the staff. So increased flushing regimes, making sure that there's no making sure that there's no unused outlets, and maybe just doing a risk assessment or a risk assessment review of the usage, which is one of the fundamental reasons for reviewing a risk assessment. Has there been or is there a change of use in the facility? So it's worth doing that risk assessment review. And it doesn't have to be a complete new document. That document just needs to be reviewed. And is it now still fit for purpose, or do we need to add anything else to it, such as an increased flushing regime, or maybe even some remedial work, some remediation to ensure that we've got the right level of storage. So.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you.
I feel as though I didn't answer that.
No, that's really helpful. We've got so many questions coming in now, Pete. I'm going to fire them at you if that's okay.
See if I can answer.
The first one is from Richard. Are there any statistics around successful prosecutions related to water quality, noting the health stats around people acquiring HAIs?
Well,
there haven't been any prosecutions for water.
Do you know what? I think Stafford 1985 was the one that I can just think of off the top of my head. The prosecutions from non-healthcare facilities. I'll do the non-healthcare facilities because they're at the top of my head. There's G4S. Nobody acquired Legionella disease from a company known as G4S Cash Solutions. However, they were fined £1.8 million because of a failure to protect their staff with works that were carried out. That had a report, which was I think 2009, or a water risk policy that was dated 2009. And from that 2009 water risk policy, it stated that there were going to be some risk assessments. Those risk assessments didn't get completed until 2012. The remediation or the remedial works on those risk assessments were never completed. So they were fined a lot of money because of their lack of engagement with their water risk policy and the processes and management structure that they should have put in place in respect to the Health and Safety at Work Act, but also in respect to the approved code of practice and the HSG 274 guidance documents. The next one was the two gentlemen based in Birmingham who took a 12-month suspended sentence. They were in their 70s and they were mismanaging. It was I think it was a food factory. No, plastic manufacturing factory. And I think they got a hefty fine, but also, like I say, a 12-month suspended sentence because of, again, somebody had contracted Legionella disease. I don't think anybody had died. But yeah, they were found to be negligent. And if you remember the Gillian Beckingham incident, she was classed as being so high up within the council that she was deemed as being the council. And when she'd cancelled the contract for the management of the cooling tower at Forum 28, which was a council-run premises, she was charged with corporate manslaughter. She was not charged. She was not convicted of corporate manslaughter, but she was charged and found guilty of breaches of health and safety at work, or Health and Safety at Work Act, and she was fined a personal fine of £15,000, and that case got concluded in 2006. So she was dragged through the courts for a total of 4 years. So from 2000, yeah, exactly. And Adele, the funny thing is, I found out recently that she's now living as a recluse on an island in Scotland because it fundamentally ruined her career.
Yeah, so it's the personal effect as well as the,
absolutely,
which has got a criminal record now as well.
Yeah. It's so. Sorry, was that Chris who asked that question from a hospital perspective? What I'll do is I'll see if I've got any information on a specific hospital acquired infection situation.
Thank you. Yeah, it was Richard who asked that question.
Was it Richard? Sorry.
Thank you. I'm going to move on because we've got loads in. Chris has asked, can you detail the difference between a dead end and a blind end?
Yes, a blind end is something that has just been purely capped off and cannot be flushed. A dead leg is something that can be flushed. It still might be a little used outlet. It still might be capped off, but it can be flushed.
Do they both then need to be, obviously, it's still an issue both at the end of the day?
100%, yeah, they're both an issue. I actually, was that you, Chris?
Yes, sorry.
I actually don't like the phraseology. I don't know why they've changed it, I've got to be honest. Because for me, it's a dead leg. It's whether it can be flushed or not flushed, it's still a dead leg to me. But maybe I'm simple.
That's fine. I like it simple.
Yeah, I do. That's why change it? Everybody knows what a dead leg is.
Yeah, me too. Why confuse things?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great question. Fiona asks, is it mandatory to have RAS-approved products? She uses an external Legionella contractor, and her Legionella risk assessments state that these are best practice recommendations and not mandatory. She's in schools, the education sector.
Okay. No. Right. I'll do that with two different hats on, if that's okay, Fiona. From a water hygiene centre perspective, from being an authorising engineer, yes, it's best practice, and we cannot advise that you don't use that you use non-RAS approved products, and we would never sanction and sign that off. But from a perspective of, you can do what you like, but if you get caught and if you get a situation within your facility, then you will have one less leg to stand on. Does that make sense, Fiona?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you. Michelle has put a link in the chat function, so rasapprovals.co.uk. So does that sound the correct one, Pete, for looking at these different fixtures and fittings that are RAS approved?
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. Roderick has asked, do you have any comments on dealing with persistent Legionella detection in a system after repeated standard chlorination, e.g. use of other chemical treatments, longer or multiple chlorinations? I think many of us have been in this position. So you've found Legionella in your system, you've cleaned it out, and you're still getting it in there. Is there sort of a longer term thing that you can do, or different approach?
Yeah, there's a supplementary control measure, and this can be there's a few products out there. There's chlorine dioxide, there's stabilized copper silver ionization, and there is also stabilized silver hydrogen peroxide. So there's a few products in there. One of the things that there's a few products out there that can be used as a supplementary control, but fundamentally there is an area that is not either got the adequate flow, it's not getting right temperatures, and it's not getting the chemical to do the disinfectant work. So from an engineering perspective, the Water Hygiene Centre, for example, would be wanting to look at the engineering design to maybe try and engineer out the problem before we went to that supplementary control measure. So let's go back to basics, and let's drill down to the four easy takeaway statements is the hot, hot, is the cold, cold, is it all moving, is it all clean?
To go back to basics sometimes.
Yeah, you've got to just strip everything back and say, look, is it
detective?
yeah, is the design right? Is the design fit for purpose? Is the design working correctly? Have we got an anti-strap pump or a shunt pump on the clarifier, for example? Is the temperatures being maintained? Can we make sure we've got temperatures? Have we got the right flow? Have we got some oven trap valves there that are reducing flow down to 5 or 10%, for example? Who knows? Yeah. We've just got to find out. Which I say we've just got to find out. That's a lot easier than it's. No, that's a lot harder than it sounds.
So get your detective hat on. We've got a question from Richard. There's a few comments from him, so I'm just going to read through. Is there any real value in TVC that's testing on new installations or refurbs if there's no history? The reason for the question is to understand the lack of accountability, responsibility by people using the water system. As daft as it sounds, I was aware of a seeding issue, which was found to be the main incoming strainer being dirty and then seeding the system. So yeah, his question is there any real value in TVC testing?
Yeah, I think you probably answered your own question there, Richard, in fairness, that if it's a new installation or if it's a refurb, there are design protocols that should be adhered to, and obviously the subcontractors who are doing the work, they should do well, first of all, they should test the incoming mains water, whether that's contaminated. They should then provide some commissioning documentation from a cleaning disinfection process, but also from a commissioning of valves, whether you've got the right flows, the right distribution sort of network, and then at the end of that, we should be checking that the system is clean and clear from it. So yes, there is value in TBC counts and Legionella and Pseudomonas counts from depending on which sort of facility you're looking at.
Thank you. We've got a question from Dom. If a water tank is inaccessible, such as positioning, asbestos, structural integrity, location, is there a requirement to inspect the water tank, or can it be legitimately managed through risk assessment, monitoring, flushing, etc.?
That's a great question, actually. So I'd take a look at it from two perspectives there. Do we really need the cold water storage tank? Could the cold water storage tank be removed and go onto mains fed system? Could it be removed or replumbed so that we've got a storage tank in the basement and maybe boosted? If we're absolutely desperate for having a cold water storage tank, and then if none of those can be achieved, can be formed, can be budgeted, could we increase monitoring around the situation, increase maybe, I don't know, maybe take some TBC counts, maybe take some Legionella analysis. So we've got to do something above and beyond what the recommendations are if we can't achieve something, if that makes sense, Dom.
Can you just explain, just in case there is anybody on this call, I know what it means, but can you just confirm what TVC stands for?
Yeah, total viable count. It's basically analysis of the general bacteria levels within that water system.
Lovely, thank you.
And the reason why we do a TBC count, Adele, is so that we keep control of the general bacteria count, because if the general bacteria count becomes out of control, then you're increasing the potential proliferation or potential risk of having ideal growing conditions for Legionella, for other waterborne pathogens. So it's basically it's a bit of a guide and a hint that you've either got it under control or you've got a problem. Yeah.
Thank you. That looks like it's all the questions there. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Oh, sorry, I've got another one. Do you have any general guidance for managing Legionella within social housing void properties?
Yes. We should be flushing the social housing void property on a weekly basis if possible. I have, sorry, I'm looking around because I feel as though I've got it here right next to me somewhere, a document that I used specifically for sheltered housing and for landlords. So I will try and locate, I will try and locate that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
it's called.
We'll keep going. We've got a few minutes
Coliform should be 0.
Yeah, so coliform would indicate fecal contamination,
Correct.
wouldn't it? So so that's a 0 on that one, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
That's a no-go area, right?
That's a no-go, yeah, don't.
That's what I thought. Cheers. Well done, Chris.
Well, Chris, just while you're on that, there's a there was a TV program on a couple of years ago, maybe longer than a couple of years ago now, which was the aerosol generation from flushing a toilet, and the aerosol generation can travel. We talked about the travel from an outlet, from splashing into a basin. Well, if you think the force of a flush, that can actually travel 8 meters. So I know. I don't have an 8-meter bathroom. I don't know if anybody else does, but my toothbrush is within 8 meters. So I've now not brushed my teeth in the bathroom. No, but my point is that's an area that we've got to take into consideration as well. So there's a lot of places now that are telling you to flush. And again, from a coronavirus perspective, there's been an increase in awareness of the flush from a toilet. Should you, don't rush, take time to put the seat down before you flush, was something that I read on a toilet some time ago.
You get all the interesting publications.
Yeah,
there, Pete. You're terrified to go in your bathroom.
But yeah, it's just while we're talking about that, it was just something
that's really interesting. Thank you.
It's not. It's horrible.
It's quite gross. I'm glad I wasn't eating, but no, it's really interesting. It's not something I thought of. That seems to be all the questions. I just want to say thank you so much, Pete. That was really, really interesting and great questions through from everybody. Thank you so much for being so interactive. So yes, this session was recorded. We're going to make it available on our branch website shortly, which Paul has put the details in there. I hope to see all of you at the next branch event on Wednesday, the 27th at 9 o'clock. But in the meantime, have a great day and thanks ever so much, Pete, for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Cool.